Hey guys, we're going to talk about a very, very, very serious topic. We're going to talk about should domestic violence victims go to prison for killing their abusers? That's a really good question. New York. Lady Catherine Williams, Julian's first childhood memory is of her father punching her mother in the face. She was 6. Her mother fell to the ground where Williams Julian was already cowering. They were eye to eye, mother and child, both trembling with fear. Her whole face was covered with blood. She said quietly, "Sitting at the kitchen table in our apartment in the Bronx. I think I even got Alzheimer's, lost my mind. I would never forget that image." Years later, when Williams, hang on, guys, Williams, sorry, when Williams Julian and her husband had a husband, sorry, had a husband of her own. She didn't fault him for hitting her. It's what she knew. For 2 decades, she said her husband beat and abused her. She grew accustomed to live with a perpetual black eye. Then one night, one September night in 1997, she said he wrapped his hands around her neck and did not let go. She knew he was going to strangle her to death. Here's a man I've known for all my life. Sorry, guys, I just gotta. Okay. And I saw a complete stranger. Williams Julian said that at this time something said, "You are a lot of danger here. You better fight back." She reached for a knife and stabbed her husband once, then fled the apartment. When the police arrived, she confessed and they arrested her. First of all, I think that she did. I'm not going to say anything about this, but I would have to say that she did defend herself. And I think they arrested her because I really don't know about law, so I would have to say maybe that they thought that she shouldn't have. I mean, it's kind of sad they arrested her, but I don't blame her for like stabbing him because he like hurt her. So let's keep talking about this. She was across the street, sitting on the stoop, crying like a baby. Eric Reynolds, a retired New York City Police Department detective, told the Huffington Post. Her only concern was him. Her husband died later that night, and William Julian was charged with murder. She was 36 and had no prior criminal record. If convicted, she faced a mandatory minimum sentence of 15 years to life. Eventually, prosecutors reduced the charge to manslaughter in the second degree, which allowed her to narrowly escape a mandatory prison sentence. She pleaded guilty and served 5 years of probation instead. But Williams Julian never forgot just how close she came to a life behind bars. Other domestic violence survivors she knew were not so lucky. They were sent to prison for decades. It was up to her. She decided to try to change that. Since 2011, she's been actively lobbying in the New York State legislature to pass a bill that gives judges greater discretion when sentencing domestic violence survivors convicted of crimes directly related to their abuse. Her effects paid off in early May when the New York State Assembly passed the Domestic Violence Survivors Justice Act, or DVSJA for short. The bill is sponsored by New York State Senator Ruth Hazel Thompson and Assemblyman Jefferson Aubrey, both Democrats, is now awaiting a vote in the state Senate Codes Committee. Under the legislation, judges could consider the role of domestic abuse in a case during sentencing and bypass mandatory minimums set by the state. They could opt to give survivors shorter sentences or give them avoid prison altogether by sentencing them to alternative programs. This law unites judges' hands so they can consider the impact of abuse at sentencing, said Gail Smith, director of the Women Prison Project at the Correctional Association of New York. Women who have acted to save their lives should not be punished by long prison sentences. To be eligible for alternative sentencing, the survivor needs to pass a three-part test. She needs to be a victim of domestic violence at the time of the offense. The abuse has to be a significant contributing factor in the crime, and the judge has to find that sentencing the survivor under the current sentencing guidance would be unduly harsh. Holy cow, this is long. Almost done. Women who have acted to save their lives should not be punished by law. So Gail say that eligible domestic violence survivors who are currently incarcerated created could apply for resentencing, but they'd have to provide cooperating evidence such as hospital records or police reports to back up their claim and that they were being abused at the time of the crime. For women who have been incarcerated for a number of years, gathering acceptable documents may be difficult. Survivors who were forced into criminal activity by abusive partners could also be eligible for alternative sentencing under the legislation. Advocates stress that abusers often use violence to coerce survivors into committing crimes like robbery or drug trafficking. A lot of survivors are forced by their abusers to make really hard decisions like whether or not they want participation in their abuser's criminal activity or keep themselves and their children safe, said Salma Anjum, Director of Public Policy at the New York State Coalition Against Domestic Violence. It can literally be a life or death decision. Supporters of alternative to incarceration programs say they are not only more human than prison, but also a lot cheaper. It costs more than $50,000 a year to incarcerate an adult in New York. In comparison, a person can receive service at an alternative to incarceration program for just $11,000 a year, according to a 2010 report by a coalition of service organizations. And Jim said that domestic violence survivors are ideal candidates for alternative sentencing since they often have no prior criminal records and pose a low threat to public safety. They need a little bit of compassionate assistance, she said. It's impossible to know exactly how many domestic violence survivors are incarcerated for crimes directly related to their abuse, as no government agency gathers this data. I've been trying to track down these numbers for over 20 years, said Sue Ostroff, director of the National Clearinghouse for the Defense of Battered Women. It's really hard to track this. Who gets to decide who is a victim of battering, or if they were acting to defend themselves? That inform is just not kept. However, there is some state level data. The New York State Departments of Correction and Community Supervision, for example, found that 67% of women sent to prison in 2005 for killing someone close to them were abused by that person. Okay, I'm not going to read the rest. Oh, actually, I'm almost done. Think about how different this would be if we spent the money to help these women escape abuse instead of locking them up, said Renee Rennick. Anecdotally, advocates say the problem is endemic across the country. If you talk to women in any prison, you will find a huge percentage of them are there for crimes related to their abuse, said Renee Rennick, Vice President of Programs and Emerging Issues at National Network to End Domestic Violence. Think about how different this would be if we spent the money to help these women escape abuse instead of locking them up. In an interview with HuffPost, Joanne Meyer, professor of clinical law at George Washington's University Law School, called New York's proposed legislation cutting edge and said she did not know of similar bills. Problems can still arise when judges exercise desperation, poorly she cautioned, especially if they don't understand how domestic violence and trauma affect victims and their behaviors. But this is still better than nothing because it does invite judges to weigh the fairness of the sentences and to consider those circumstances more broadly. Meir added, hopefully reasonable and thoughtful judges will make use of it. Williams Julian believes other women deserve to have the opportunity she did, a second chance for a life free of violence. Power and control is the core of domestic violence. She said prisons are governed by that. If your goal is to rehabilitation and rebuild, incarceration is not the answer. The whole point of the DVSJA, she said, is to avoid victimizing the victim. It's not about you. You committed a crime. You need to be punished. Williams Julian said, he or she has already been punished. What they need to be is taken into the right environment to get them the help they need to begin to rebuild as a person. If you need help in the US, call 1-800-799/SAFE or SAFE as in 7233, the National Domestic Violence Hotline. This is actually one of the hardest topics to talk about because a lot of people in the United States are getting abused, and it's really sad to talk about. It really is. I hate hearing about it. It just drives me crazy because it's kind of disrespectful to basically abuse your partner, your wife, your husband, wife, husband. I think it's kind of, disrespectful because you're disrespecting them and you want to show them appreciation by hitting them. That's not safe. Thanks guys so much for watching. We'll talk more. Bye.